Hello and welcome to Fowl Plays, where we look at tales of tabletop tragedy that are sure to ruffle some feathers. I'm your host, Boss Goose, and in today's story, we have a player who joins a game that was promised to be based on a module, but turned into something completely different. As the DM forces the party into encounter after encounter that took hours to resolve, homebrewed rules that made avoiding traps and hazards almost impossible, and even had OP stumble across a sexually graphic situation with a disturbing level of detail given, much to the shock and disgust of the players. All the while dangling the module in front of the party like a carrot on a stick. But before we get to that, it's time for a quick round of bandits, zombies, and mummies, oh my. And here's how you can play along. In order to get to the story, we need to pass through these dark and spooky woods. It's your job to figure out which of these enemies are waiting for us so we can effectively avoid them and make our way safely to the other side. Now go ahead and make your choice and we'll reveal the results in 3, 2, 1, and it was zombies. So if you chose correctly, well done and congratulations, we should have no problem running past those shambling simpletons. And if you chose incorrectly, then the only option is to hit that subscribe button so you can get updates whenever new videos are available on my channel and easily access a growing collection of content that will keep you entertained for hours and help protect you from the incoming horde. But now, without any further delays, it's time for you to take your seats and wet your beaks as we dive on into today's tale. Content warning: BDSM, non-consented. Sometimes it's your good friends who run the worst games. Unfortunately for me, he was also the person who introduced me to D&D, and until I joined a play-by-post game, the only source of a regular game I had. I spoke with him over some of the issues I had, but he'd often deny or justify away the complaints. We are no longer friends, but it's not due to D&D. We were promised the Sunless Citadel, and had some homebrew quests to fulfill before we could actually go to the Sunless Citadel. The group included a mountain dwarf paladin, his new girlfriend, a turtle wizard, a half-orc fighter, a high elf rogue, and myself, a dwarven cleric. His roommate would later join us as a noble human variant fighter. I had a new character, Harbeck, cleric brother to the DM's girlfriend's paladin. I referred to my character as Beck for short. The first call of order was a village that was being plagued with bandits. These bandits would cast a town-wide sleep spell and then pillage what they could while most of the residents remained asleep. We were tasked with seizing and protecting the town cleric's magical artifact. The cleric herself went missing before the adventure started, and we were told our duty was of the utmost importance. The DM had us toil through 2 combat encounters with too many bandits that half the party was downed at least once during the first fight. You can imagine the disappointment when he plunged us into a second encounter. Somehow the party pulled through and entered the second level of the inn where we seized the magical artifact. At this point, as players, we disagreed about the best approach. I advocated for leaving town because if there's a town-wide sleep spell, then we're best situated outside, but the others thought we could hide, have our elf guard the artifact, and be okay. Night came, and the DM started narrating how we all got lulled into the effects of the sleep spell. The elven rogue player protested and was allowed to roll to see if he passed a con check. He rolled an 18 and was still put to sleep. The party woke up to the artifact missing and the inn up in flames, with the only exit being the window. Great. Defeated, and slightly charred, the party headed to the local tavern to try and get a lead on where the bandits went. We toiled around and asked NPCs for an out-of-game hour or so. The DM's girlfriend was literally looking at his DM notes and saying he should just give us the information, but he told her we hadn't asked the right people the right questions. She pouted, then he gave us the information. The bandits were hiding out in the forest across the creek. We were now tasked with both locating the missing cleric and retrieving her magical artifact. Once we reach the forest, the DM describes a clearing, and that we can glimpse the creek not far off. The wizard moves towards the creek, and surprise, the ground under him caves into a pitfall trap that we had no chance or no way of seeing. His wizard falls prone. One of the PCs mentioned that they have a passive perception of 15, to which the DM explained that, well, he doesn't like passive perception, and how it's a guaranteed success, so he just doesn't use it. Of course, once the pitfall triggered, a swarm of bandits appeared out of the trees and we had to have another encounter. We reached the creek. It was a shallow river of walkable depth. I was suspicious at this point and asked for a perception roll. There are some thingies swimming in the water, the DM explained. I asked what they are, and he refused to elaborate and said that the water was a bit murky. My cleric used his light cantrip on a pebble and tossed it into the water. This cantrip is meant to illuminate up to 20 feet of bright light, and he denied any more clarification because. The party, seeing no other way of crossing the creek, waded through. The DM asked us all to roll 1d4, just because. Anyway, it turned out that there were leeches latched onto us, and we took that 1d4 damage for the number of leeches where each leech would suck out 1 damage regardless of armor or clothing. It's also worth noting that the Detect Trap spell doesn't work at all in this universe because house rules. When the party finally found the magical artifact and the missing cleric, the cleric was furious at us for letting the bandits take it. She cursed us into withering away or the like unless we could find a magical remedy for it before the next new moon, i.e. the enchanted apple in the Sunless Citadel. The party headed for the Sunless Citadel, and we stopped at a small town to investigate suspicious individuals sneaking around. The party split, and it was my cleric and the rogue who combed through the library, and the paladin, the fighter, and the wizard who checked out the residential homes. At the library, my cleric noticed a group of robed figures who rounded a corner and seemingly disappeared. He solved a puzzle and found a secret entrance that he and the rogue entered. This is funny, because you wouldn't think that entering a secret entrance literally means having sex, especially in a game where more than half the players were recruited from a D&D Facebook group, and no one consented to sexual content, and that there wouldn't be any explicit scenes. We witnessed someone on all fours between two others, someone crucified naked, and the sound of someone getting flogged. The rogue player was visibly uncomfortable, and I was disgusted. The people having sex noticed us and either started reaching for their weapons or closing in on us, which I thought was unlikely because how many times will people go as far as a secret dungeon to hide their kinks, but still resort to furiously pursuing those who stumble in? Wouldn't most people cover up an embarrassment and yell at the party to leave? Why would you even spring your kink on a group of players who never said they wanted to know about it? My cleric and the rogue narrowly managed to flee, while some of the pursuers towards the back of the chase sequence started slinging spells at us. The party regrouped to reapproach the situation after the others couldn't find any leads. When we went back into the dungeon, we found it largely empty except for the equipment and some books. These books were splattered in a white substance. Gross. And my cleric promptly burnt them all at a distance with Sacred Flame. The DM initially tried to have me roll for Dex to avoid having the stuff splatter on my cleric or something. Really? Why though? But I explained that Sacred Flame has a 30-foot range. We private messaged about this after the session, and he mentioned he was hurting his soul after I had the books burnt. He argued they weren't soaked, just splattered and sticky, and that one person's sacrilege is another's fervent worship, which disgusted me to no end. You and me both, man. He agreed not to spring his kinks onto the group in the future. Despite the surprise BDSM, the party continued. We caught wind of some special artifacts in an abandoned wizard's tower and went to investigate. After puzzling through the main chamber and picking up some potions plus a handful of small trinkets, but nothing proportionally rewarding for the amount of travel and work it took to reach the tower in the first place, we checked out the rooftop. There was a bandit captain and his underling who immediately engaged us in combat. We were a group of 4 level 2 players. The bandit captain had 2 ranged attacks with his knives and 1 melee attack with his sword every turn. The underling had 2 attacks, could combine ranged and melee. We managed to kill the underling, but this gave the captain advantage on all his attacks for 1d4 rounds because that underling was his brother. We had 4 PCs who could attack once each per round, excluding action surge. We had a cumulative health pool of about 50, whereas the bandits had 5 attacks per round between them, an AC of about 18 for the captain, and a combined health pool of 50 plus, from broad after-game estimates. It got to the point where our casters were out of spell slots, our martial classes were downed, and it was impossible to win despite fairly good rolls on the whole from our party. Our only option that wasn't being TPK'd was my cleric begging the bandits to spare the party's lives if he'd give his late brother an honorable and blessed burial. The bandit agreed so long as he could take his share of the loot from the party. I planned to stall the burial until dawn, where Lathander's connection to his cleric would be strongest and finally wipe out the captain. But the DM denied me, despite numerous successful deception rolls, even with disadvantage. The entire group was seething by the end of it. We continued on our journey. While on a mountain path, I had a hunch there was something wrong. Roll for perception. I rolled a 19 without modifiers, and all I saw was some landscaping, which of course turned out to be enemies hiding in the distance with an extended pitfall trap on the 1x12 corridor / cliff edge to reach them. Completely bullshit trap you can't even avoid. Nice. After some hobgoblins and goblins attacked, the DM decided to add in some random eagles to attack us. We were low in health, but managed to scrape by when the paladin suddenly had the ground cave under her feet and fell into a cavern inside the mountain. The party rogue had a rope on him, tied the rope to the nearest large boulder, and went down to retrieve the paladin when the DM asked for us all to roll initiative and had zombies attack the paladin. The rogue was forced to wait for 2 turns before he could join the fight to account for the time spent tying the rope and then sliding down, which is fine, but when the party turned to climb up the rope again, the DM decided to punish us with a convenient landslide and forced us into the catacombs of the mountain. I objected. We've been adventuring for about 2 months at this point and still weren't even close to getting to the citadel. I asked him when we can get there. He said, "It's meant to take months for you to get to the citadel, and I want you to feel like you've worked for it." I argued that travel time can be implied, but dragging it out is only going to take precious time and level up beyond the recommended 1 to 3 range for the Sunless Citadel. He shrugged and said he'd deal with the problem when it came up. In the catacombs, the party reached an altar with what looked like a small ceremonial bowl. The chaotic neutral rogue cut his finger and dripped some blood inside out of curiosity. The DM summoned 30 zombies that chased us down the corridor. The party barricaded themselves in a small room, which we made a primitive choke point with some clever thinking. Salvaging materials to make pseudo-sandbags, piling old clothes onto the sandbags, pouring water on that, and using Ray of Frost to make them icy and hard to climb, etc. We managed to dispatch of the 30, trickle-fed in groups of 3 to 4, without expending any potions, spell slots, or scarce once-per-rest resources. The DM, after conveniently forgetting to apply some penalty rolls on his zombies from our sandbag choke point, was visibly annoyed he couldn't get us to use any of our resources, and we were annoyed too, for different reasons. We left our barricade room and there was a high ceiling room full of cobwebs. The party correctly suspected that a giant spider was hiding somewhere in it. My cleric took one of the sandbags from the choke point and threw it up into the webs to trigger the spider out of hiding on purpose. Nothing happened. The party had no choice but to proceed. Conveniently, once we all stepped onto the webs, the DM had us roll for initiative despite resourceful thinking earlier to trigger the webs beforehand. I asked the DM why he made that call, and he shrugged and smirked at me. My cleric used Radiance of the Dawn to kill the spider later, and the party took a short rest before advancing into the final room. The final room of the catacombs had a mummy who was far, far too strong for our party. It had a crown of dark magic on its head it used to summon minions, and I had the bright idea to use radiant damage when it summoned a skeleton. "You can't use Radiance of the Dawn, you just used it with the spider." I told him to look back on the cleric's channeled divinity because Radiance of the Dawn recharges per short rest. The DM was annoyed, but let me kill off the minion and deal damage to the mummy. Later, the mummy rolled a 20 to dodge an attack and smoothly sidestepped out of the way, ending with a ballet pirouette. Fucking excuse me? The mummy managed to curse the paladin with its rotting fist effect. No regaining HP, lose 10 HP per 24 hours, at 0 HP, turn to dust. Can only be removed with remove curse or similar. After the encounter, the DM admitted to not having read the stat block of the mummy properly, and being shocked its curse was so strong. My cleric shot the killing blow, guiding bolt, through the mummy's head, and shattered the crown with a blast of radiant damage. Later, I had to leave town for family reasons, and was promised that after half a year of sitting through his campaigns, the party would get into the citadel, but the DM kept plaguing the party with encounter after encounter. I ended up needing to leave one session before the party set foot inside. I was seething, and the DM didn't so much as offer an apology. In fact, when I finally came back, I was told that there wasn't a canonical explanation about what happened to my character. DM decided in the spur of the moment that he was imprisoned and put inside a cage soon after setting foot inside the citadel. The party heard my characters yelling in a further room, but the DM decided to make them fight for 1.5 to 2 hours, despite literally everyone in the party asking if I could be included yet. I said, "Hey man, I feel like I'm being punished for getting dragged out to chaperone my sister for something I never wanted." And he said, "Kinda does, doesn't it?" And ignored later complaints. My PC was caged, with none of his weapons and possessions, with a chaotic evil Gnoll cleric, who for some hypocritical reason, managed to keep his holy symbol. I asked where the rest of my boys' possessions were after the party came and freed my PC, and was told to roll a 1d20 to see how much of it I could find again. I rolled a 17 or 18 and was allowed only 2/3 of my original loot. The DM said I couldn't find my symbol either, and was going to have to fight the rest of the dungeon without it until my cleric's paladin sister made a new holy symbol for him. At that point, I didn't even bother questioning how she could have found anything vaguely holy for Lathander in that shithole of a citadel, but I kept quiet because I felt so fucking done. Anyway, the DM wouldn't let us take a short rest and had the Gnoll rat us out by screaming for guards. We ended up going through another combat grind. The session was 2 hours of me watching them fight, 15 minutes of brief roleplay, and then another 1 to 2 hours of fighting more goblins. We fucking killed them, but the wizard was out of spell slots. I was left with 2 to 3, the paladin was out of lay on hands, and the fighters were pretty beaten up. The DM still had one of the goblins manage to flee the fight for whatever reason. We reached an unavoidable caltrops corridor which nearly killed the party because who would have guessed a lack of short rest might really endanger a group in the middle of a dungeon. DM had a sudden change of heart in the last 1/3 of the room and said, "If you move really slowly, you can avoid taking damage altogether." Wow, thanks. Really useful to know, but we have to rest now because one hit would literally down everyone in the party. We came back after a rest and ended up needing to grind through 2 hobgoblins and 2 to 3 normal goblins, which reanimated because someone apparently kept the mummy crown despite me explicitly destroying it with guiding bolt. We even managed to keep a hobgoblin guard alive but unconscious for questioning, but the first thing the DM did was have one of the zombies beeline him and bite his neck. Funny because that hobgoblin was literally in the corner of the room furthermost from the door, yet the zombie went for him. At another point in this partially zombified fight, the DM announced that he rolled a nat 20 to strike the paladin and downed her for the second time in the encounter. In the first encounter of the day. The fighter's player said, "You know you can fudge enemy rolls, right? So if they get a nat 20, you can change that?" And the response was, "Yeah, but I'm gonna leave it." What the fuck? The DM also tried to curve an arrow around the doorway to hit the half-orc fighter in the group, until the player himself complained unless this was a magically enchanted arrow of heat-seeking, then that's just not how projectiles work. He asked the DM after the fight if any of the guards had magical weapons we could loot. "Nope, just greatswords." Then, when the fighters tried to take the greatswords, DM said, "You pick it up and you realize it's quite rusted from years of repair, and that it's made for goblinoid hands. You feel you would suffer a penalty if you use this weapon." I don't know how, but the party managed to suffer and make our way to the goblin's royal chamber, or whatever's the closest equivalent in their terms. There was all this description for the heavy door to the goblin leader's chamber. Initiative, my cleric tried to use the door as cover, and he made it vanish just because. Increasingly frequently, throughout the campaign after I returned to town, I noticed that the DM was constantly misgendering Harbeck because Beck sounds like a girl's name, despite his sister calling him brother, and despite him calling himself the firstborn son of the Anaheim clan. We were talking outside of session time when he made a joke that she was enjoying herself being caged up with all the goblins around her, or something along the lines of, She was enjoying BDSM in a cage with goblins, which I shut him down for. Enough was enough, and I quit. Well, this was quite the tale we had this time. The DM in this story didn't seem like they were trying to be outright malicious towards the party, but seemed to suffer from a lack of adaptability in my opinion, at least in the beginning. When you're running a game, there's a lot of work that goes into it, and so if you create a big important section of the story and you want the players to experience it, it can be disheartening if they never actually come across it. But that's the nature of D&D, and as the DM, you do have the ability to be flexible and move things around or create hooks that will draw the players to what you want or need them to see. Being heavy-handed with things like needing to ask a certain individual a specific question, or having the ground suddenly collapse beneath the party in order to force them into a certain place, not only wastes time with the former, but takes away the feeling of freedom with the latter. Now that that's out of the way, there were a lot of problems here. First off, combat. Combat can be epic at times, but when the party's faced with dozens of bland enemies who are all basically just fodder, it becomes very tedious instead. Personally, I'm okay with a long encounter, but if it's just hacking goblins for hours at a time, only to do it all over again after a brief break, I'm going to get very bored very fast. Considering this happened over and over again throughout the campaign, makes me think the DM didn't really understand how to build encounters. This is highlighted again with the bandit captain getting permanent advantage, and the mummy, which is crazy strong for such a low-level party. The DM was on the right track with adding stronger enemies to replace a handful of weaker ones, and it does make for a better fight, but you have to be really careful and make sure that you're keeping it balanced, especially with low-level characters like this. The traps were a whole nother thing. If you're going to make it so that passive perception and detect traps don't work in your game, you damn well better make sure that there's something that gives the players a hint that there's something off, or if they roll a good perception check, let them see it so it can be dealt with. Forcing the party to walk into trap after trap is really annoying, and as the story went on, I could feel OP's frustration building. There were times when it did feel like OP was getting a bit confrontational with the DM, but if these events had been happening over months, all the while being told that the adventure that they were promised they were playing was coming, I can understand why they were starting to lose their patience. This confrontational attitude is probably why the DM seems so smug when insinuating that OP was in fact being punished for missing a few games, but that's just really being immature, especially where OP didn't actually want to miss them, they had to due to family obligations. And now for the elephant in the gimp suit. The session where OP and the rogue stumbled across some kind of sex cult was entirely unnecessary and seemed completely separate from the story at large, as it led to nothing. The DM might argue that there was information in the books, but the fact that he took the time to point out that they were splattered with white stuff? Really? Personally, I would not have touched them, and I think fire was the correct choice here. It's just so out of place and gross, and the players did not need to see that. And the fact that DM said that he was hurt by their reaction, and his other comments about fervent worship, it seemed maybe he was testing the waters to take the campaign in a completely different direction. Regardless, sex in D&D can be done, but you don't need to be graphic or vulgar about it. And if you're going to be, you definitely need to make sure that your players are okay with it beforehand. But I've rambled enough now, and I know there's probably some things I failed to touch on. But I'm just going to end it with saying I don't blame OP for quitting, and I feel bad that this DM was their only source for a game for so long. And I really hope that they were able to find a table that doesn't have so much tension in the future. Anyways, thanks for checking out my video and sticking around till the end. It was a long one, but I hope you enjoyed it. I upload new content every Tuesday, Thursday, and Sunday, so make sure you check out my channel for more D&D stories. It's crazy that only a few videos ago I was just thanking you all for 50 subs, and now we're sitting at over 100. You guys are amazing and really know how to make a goose feel loved. So once again, thank you all. And if you like this video, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and leave me a goosebump in the comments below. Your continued support is appreciated. But until next time, be good players.